And dude, these results were kind of shocking. Hey, welcome back to another video. This one has been highly requested and I've been working on it all week to make sure that I get the most extensive and entertaining video out to you. So I'm amped about it. Here's the deal with it. I'm going to put timestamps in the description because I know a lot of you don't have a lot of time and you just want to see the samples. So if you want to do that, you definitely can. I think that it would be amazing if you watch the whole thing, and it will probably make a lot more sense if you watch the entire thing, but do whatever is best for you. They're there if you want them. Before you timestamp it though, if you're going to go that route, there's a couple important things that you should know. First one is that I left scene optimization on the A51 because the last time I had a Samsung phone and I turned it off, a lot of people got very heated at me in the comment section. So it's on. Let me know in future camera comparisons if you would like me to continue keeping it on or if I should shut it off by just leaving a comment. The second thing you should know is that none of these companies paid me to make this video or paid me to portray their product in a certain way. You have my word, I promise you, wouldn't do that. So this is a completely unbiased review, but it's also my opinion. So you may totally disagree with me on an image and be like, what is she talking about? And if you do, you should let me know like nicely in a comment below and we could talk about it. And then the third thing that you should know that's super important is that pricing is a huge framing factor for this video. So what do I mean by that? Well, the OnePlus Nord is not coming to America, which is a bummer, which means that its price is 399 euros or 28,999 Indian rupees. That means that when you convert that to USD, the euros to USD is like 455 US dollars. All right, so that was a mouthful, but here's why you should care about it. Basically means that these phones will be more or less of a bargain depending on where you live. Like the 8 Pro is an amazing deal in India for sure, and the OnePlus Nord will also be a great deal depending on where you live. It also means that if you're in the US, unless you import this phone, you can't get it as of now. I think that we need to kind of pay attention to the pricing, but I think it's also important to note that no matter what region you're in, the 8 Pro is like the flagship phone, and the Nord and the A51 are definitely the more mid-tier models. And some of the results were actually super surprising, so I'm excited to show them to you. But that's all I'm gonna say about pricing. I think it's time that we hop into image number one. Okay, so this picture is just like a standard outdoor test just to see what the detail looks like. And when zoomed out, they all look pretty good, but when you zoom in a little bit, you can see that the A51 has by far the least amount of detail. They all pack a 48 megapixel sensor, so this image really just drives the point home that megapixels are not created equal. A lot of it has to do with the actual sensor and not just the number. I do definitely like the color that the A51 packed though. It's a little bit deeper and a lot more contrasty, and you'll kind of hear my opinion on that fluctuate throughout the video. There are definitely certain times where that contrasty look is really nice, but I also think that there's other times where it's not that good and it makes you actually lose detail in the picture. So you'll hear me say that, and I really think that it's like scene dependent. Speaking of color though and contrast, let's move inside to a picture that I took of colored pencils, and this one is really interesting for a few reasons. The first reason is that the skin tone that they chose might be a little deceiving. So at first you might be thinking like, oh my gosh, the A51 totally messed up the scene, her hand looks totally red. But it is COVID time right now, and that means that I'm washing my hands a lot, so sometimes my hands actually do look that red and irritated, so the A51 actually portrayed my skin tone the most accurate. The 8 Pro and the Nord phone did not portray it perfectly accurately. And continuing on with red, that's actually the second reason why this is an interesting photo. A lot of times smartphone camera sensors cannot handle red and they totally oversaturate it, and we can definitely see that that happened on the A51 on the actual box. Like that red is just totally oversaturated. The OnePlus Nord also oversaturated it a little bit, so the 8 Pro unsurprisingly definitely handled that the best. Sharpness is pretty even among the three, but the third thing that's interesting about this pic is the difference in depth of field. So the OnePlus Nord has an f1.75 aperture on the primary lens, the 8 Pro is an f1.8 aperture, and the A51 has an f2.0 aperture. Okay, so a quick breakdown on how aperture affects your image for anyone that doesn't know. Basically, the lower the number, the more light that gets into the sensor and the blurrier the background. So we can actually see that although 0.2 is not a huge difference, on a smartphone sensor, it can actually make a difference. And that's shown in the fact that the A51, the sandbag, is much more clear in its image in comparison to the 8 Pro. I think that this is also probably a good time to mention that I'm not perfect, obviously. And there is some human error with these tests, so I try to be as good as I can be and as precise as I can be, but obviously if I hold the phone slightly differently, it can slightly affect the images, so you should definitely keep that in mind, but I am trying my best to make it even and fair. All right, switching to an image of me. This is to test out their depth effect modes, and I really put the cameras through the ringer on this one. So the lighting was definitely tough. There was like fluorescent overhead lights, and it created like this really harsh scene where the cameras definitely struggled a little bit all in their own way. So the A Pro unfortunately blew out parts of my face in favor of like a moodier pic, and the A51 also blew out parts of my face. It also went with a much warmer color tone for the picture, and the blur on the A51's image also feels like a bit fake. Like, why are my legs oddly out of focus? There's no like soft focus blur going on. The edge detection around my face and hair is pretty good across the board. And the A Pro and the OnePlus Nord have an option to take the picture also at a closer focal length. So I did that on both of them, and they both overexposed my face. Otherwise, the images look decent, but honestly, most cameras in this scenario would not do that well, so I'm not gonna fault them too much. This test was mainly to see like portrait mode, and they all did pretty well with edge detection, so that's good to see. For the sake of time right now, I'm gonna include some more portrait mode tests of things that aren't a human subject, but I'm not gonna give any commentary on them because I know that a lot of you like shorter videos. If you wanna hear more about the depth effect mode on the Nord, I'm making a full review of this phone, so just let me know with a comment and be sure to get subscribed so you don't miss it. All right, the next sample is kind of going along with the theme of zoom. So it is 2020, and a lot of the flagship phones are really putting an emphasis on zoom range, and the Nord is no different. So the Nord has a max zoom of 10 times X, the A51 has 8 times X, and the A Pro has a massive 30 times zoom. So this tree picture was taken at 10 times on the OnePlus 8 Pro and the OnePlus Nord to keep it like easy to compare, and then it was taken at the maximum on the A51, which is 8 times. And honestly, I was pretty impressed with the OnePlus Nord for its price. The 8 Pro though is by far a lot more impressive. It looks really sharp, so if you're going to be taking a lot of zoomed in photos, the 8 Pro is obviously a lot better. It's honestly, I think, probably the only postable image out of the bunch, but if you're in a pinch, the OnePlus Nord or the A51 will do okay. The A51's image looks a little bit more like a painting than the OnePlus Nord, so the OnePlus Nord definitely wins in terms of detail retention. The 8 Pro also has a dedicated telephoto lens, so that probably gave it a little bit of an advantage as well. They all have an ultrawide lens though, and that's the next test, and dude, these results were kind of shocking. So the A51 crushed it. It has far superior exposure. Like, you can actually see the beautiful salt lamp. It's not blown out like it is on the 8 Pro or the Nord. And the 8 Pro, while it does have better sharpness, isn't my favorite image out of the bunch because I actually think that in this particular case, the exposure mattered more. It's the first thing that I noticed in the picture. Even when I punched into the primary lens, the A51 still had the superior exposure. But then I went into 3x on the 8 Pro, and I think that the 8 Pro now has the best image, and the Nord regained its second spot. And that's because even though it's still not perfectly exposed to the salt lamp, when you're in like this, you definitely notice that the A51 kind of erased the texture of the couch because there's a lack of detail. Detail became a little bit more important as we zoomed in, but the ultra-wide result was definitely extremely impressive. But honestly, just when I was praising the A51 for doing well with the exposure, it let me down by adding too much contrast to this image, which led to a loss of detail in the tripod. So sometimes the contrasty look can be really nice, but definitely sometimes it overdoes it. And honestly, a lot of the phones overdo it at different points throughout this test, so there is no perfect phone that always adds the perfect amount of contrast. It's kind of hit or miss. And then something a lot of people have been asking about, selfies. So this is the first OnePlus phone that has 2 selfie cameras, so if you're into selfies, you'll definitely appreciate the fact that there's not only a wide selfie camera, but an ultra wide. But for myself personally, I would have preferred a smaller hole punch cutout rather than the extra selfie camera. This first test was just taken with the regular camera, and right out of the gate, I definitely prefer the warmer tone that the A51 provides for my face. It's definitely a more flattering skin tone, but the 8 Pro and the OnePlus Nord provide a much more accurate tone for my hair. Like, the color looks a lot more true to life on the 8 Pro and the Nord in comparison to the A51. Otherwise, sharpness across the board is pretty good, and when I punched out to the ultra-wide on the Nord, it did look a little bit awkward that I was like one person in this giant wide photo, but it is there and the quality is pretty good, so if you want it, I think that you'll be pretty stoked on the images that you get from it. And the cameras have really great front-facing video as well. This is a sample of the Nord's front-facing camera. It's actually super impressive. I think that it's great. And this is also a mic test for you, so kind of a 2-in-1. Switching back to the rear sensor, we see color tone differences kind of become prominent again, and it seems to happen anytime there's a person in the image. A51 again goes to that warmer tone, and the Nord this time went to a greener tone with more contrast, actually making the phone lose detail in both my hair and my eyes. So that's my least favorite image out of the 3. All right, another 2020 trend. macro photography. So we're seeing a ton of manufacturers kind of add this macro lens to their phone to market the phone as having more lenses, but the macro lenses aren't extremely valuable because they're extremely low resolution. So the A51 has a 5 megapixel macro lens, and the OnePlus Nord has a 2 megapixel macro lens, and it's kind of what you expect. So the image from the A51 is a little bit sharper. The A51 also made me come a little bit closer to the subject to get it in focus. And then the A Pro actually does not have a dedicated macro lens, but it's actually the best macro image. So if you're taking a ton of macro shots, obviously the A Pro would be preferred. But if that's out of your budget and you're deciding between the A51 and the OnePlus Nord, the A51's image is definitely a lot more sharp. And I would not really want to post a macro shot from the OnePlus Nord just because it's 2 megapixels. Like, there's not a ton of sharpness there. So there definitely are times when megapixels matter, more so on like the lower end than the higher end, if that makes sense. Heading back outside, this shot is interesting for 2 reasons. The first reason is that the A Pro kind of picked a weird area to focus on, and in my opinion, it's actually less pleasing to the eye. And the second reason is that they all pack slightly different white balances. So the A51 goes to the coolest tone, and then the Nord is the second coolest tone. And I actually think that the most true life tone is somewhere in between the A Pro and the OnePlus Nord, but my favorite tone here is actually the A51, just because it kind of fits my moodier aesthetic, but that is 100% personal preference. All right, 2 quick night mode tests before we hop into video. This first one is a lower light scenario, but with a twist, and the twist is that the subject does not have a ton of light coming onto it, but it is omitting a ton of light to the wall, which makes this really complicated for the sensors to figure out because the exposure is so different. And they all struggled in their own way, but by far the worst image is from the A51. It actually exposed the background really well, but it totally underexposed the subject, which is kind of the point of the image. So that completely knocks it out in my opinion. I think that the Nord actually killed it here mostly. There's great sharpness and clarity on the subject, and it's decently exposed alongside the background also being decently exposed, although some parts are a little bit blown out. The A Pro met somewhere in the middle of the A51 and the Nord's approach, but I think that it actually in doing so made the image slightly less sharp in certain areas. So I think that the OnePlus Nord is my favorite here. Hopping to an easier lower light test though, they all did pretty well. The A51 went for a less saturated pink, which is actually not true to life, and it's also a little bit less sharp, so it's probably the worst image out of the 3, which again is not completely surprising, but I don't think that it's terrible. It's definitely usable. And when you're doing night mode photos, something that's really important is keeping your hand steady because the shutter stays open longer. So again, this is another area where human error can occur. But in this particular test, the OnePlus Nord handled the motion of my hand the best, producing the sharpest image. And then maybe what you've been waiting for, video. So the first time I did this video test, I held out all the phones like this and I tried to get them all at the same angle, and it didn't work because all of like the field of view was different, so the light was hitting the sensor differently, and it wasn't a fair test. So what I did instead was I kept the lighting exactly the same, and I ran through the course 3 times, one time with each phone to try to make it the most accurate I could, and they all packed decent video, but again, the A51 packs the worst video out of the 3. So they all have 4K 30 frames per second, which is really nice. And a couple years ago, if you said that was on like a budget or mid-range phone, it would be shocking. So there definitely is an impressive feat of technology and technology advancement in such a short time, but the A51 definitely has a lot less sharpness and more noise, and the exposure isn't as good, so it's by far like the worst video here. The OnePlus Nord definitely did pretty well, and it also did well with stabilization, so that was actually pretty impressive. I think that the A Pro definitely had the best video here, but the Nord was a very close second. It's obviously not a flagship camera like OnePlus advertises, like the A Pro is the flagship camera in the OnePlus line, but it's really close, and for the price, it's pretty impressive. It seems like OnePlus definitely put a lot of their money towards camera technology, but also towards display technology and the build. Like, they created a pretty impressive phone, and it definitely outclasses the A51 in a lot of ways. And I'm gonna definitely do a full review of the OnePlus Nord, so if there's more specific things that you want me to cover, you should let me know in the comment below. But right now, I'm pretty impressed with it. If you want to see more camera samples from the A51 and the A Pro alongside my other thoughts on the phone, like the full review, you can check out the A51 full review here, the A Pro full review here, and you can subscribe right here and also turn on the bell notification so you can see the OnePlus Nord full review. Thanks so much for taking your time to watch this one. If you watched all the way through, you're a real one, and I appreciate you. I'll catch you in the next video. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.